In the bleak expanse of the outer rim, the planet Gartheon spun silently, its atmosphere a swirling tapestry of toxic clouds and lightning storms. The ongoing war between the human coalition and the alien confederacies had turned it into a strategic battleground, its surface scarred by relentless conflict. Commander Eli Voss stood on the bridge of the human flagship, the Herald of Dawn, watching the distant flickers of artillery fire on the planet's surface. The Herald was stationed in geosynchronous orbit above the largest of these battles, a critical offensive that had been raging for weeks without a clear victor. "Report," Voss demanded, his voice cutting through the ambient hum of the bridge operations. "Sir, the 5th Regiment is holding the line, but they're taking heavy casualties. The enemy has deployed a new class of mechs, bigger and more heavily armored than we've seen before," replied Lieutenant Kara Wells, her face illuminated by the soft glow of her console. Voss's jaw tightened. The new enemy mechs were a complication they hadn't anticipated. If they couldn't counter this threat, the entire operation could collapse. "Deploy drones for close surveillance. I want every detail on those mechs. Find a weakness." "Yes, sir," Wells acknowledged, tapping commands into her console. As the drones descended through the cloud layers, sending back real-time data, Voss turned his attention to the strategic map. Each blink of light represented lives in the balance, decisions that weighed heavily on his shoulders. War had evolved with technology, yet the chaos and unpredictability of battle remained constant. In the void of space, surrounded by the latest tech humanity could muster, Voss felt a primal fear that technology could only mask, not erase. Back on the surface, Sergeant Ava Jackson crouched in the muddy trenches carved into Gartheon's crust. Rain mixed with the acidic atmosphere, creating a hazardous mist that corroded metal and flesh alike. Around her, soldiers from various planets, united under the human flag, prepared their weapons, their faces etched with determination and fear. "We've got one shot at this," Jackson shouted over the roar of the storm. "Echo team, you flank left. Bravo, you're with me. We push at my signal." Her team nodded, checking their rifles and energy packs. The alien mechs loomed in the distance, their steps thundering over the sound of thunder. Jackson knew the risks. Every soldier did. But retreat was not an option, not when so much was at stake. As the drones fed data back to the Herald, Wells analyzed the incoming information. "Sir, the mechs have a vulnerable joint between their torso and lower segments. If we can hit that spot with enough firepower, it might give us an edge." "Good. Relay that info to ground forces. Authorize the use of Class 4 explosives. We take those mechs down today," Voss ordered. Back on Gartheon, as the signal from the Herald came through, Jackson rallied her troops. "This is it. Focus fire on the joints. Move out." The humans surged forward, a wave of resolve and desperation. Above them, the sky crackled with the energy of orbital strikes, a testament to the relentless human spirit. In the chaos, Jackson led her team through the fog, each step bringing them closer to the towering foes. War had no rules, no fairness. It was survival, adaptation, and sacrifice. As the first mech stumbled, impacted by the concentrated fire, the human forces cheered, their morale boosted by this small victory in a seemingly endless war. Eli Voss stared at the holographic displays floating above the command table, analyzing the shifting front lines on Gartheon. The victory against the alien mechs had been a crucial but costly success. Now, the enemy was regrouping faster than anticipated, their movements suggesting a massive counterattack was brewing in Sector 9, a critical junction for supply routes. "Lieutenant Wells, status on the reinforcements from the Alliance?" Voss asked, his eyes never leaving the glowing red dots that marked enemy advances. "They're en route, Commander, but the latest estimates show they won't arrive for another 6 hours. The enemy could begin their offensive any moment now," Wells replied, concern evident in her voice. Voss nodded grimly. Time was a luxury they did not have. "Prepare all squads for immediate deployment. We hold Sector 9 at all costs." On the surface, Sergeant Ava Jackson received the orders as she supervised the fortification of their position. Her squad, along with others from the human coalition, worked feverishly under the shadow of looming enemy cruisers that dotted the skyline like dark sentinels. "Double up on the energy barriers. I want crossfire positions set up in 5 minutes," Jackson barked as her troops scrambled to comply. The air was thick with tension, each soldier aware that the coming hours would be pivotal. As the enemy began their assault, a barrage of plasma fire rained down on the human defenses. Explosions ripped through the air, sending shockwaves through the ground. Jackson ducked behind a barrier, shouting commands. "Return fire! Use the disruptors to break their formation!" In orbit, Voss watched the battle unfold, his hands clenched behind his back. The Herald of Dawn trembled slightly as it redirected power to its defense systems, preparing to provide whatever support it could from space. "Commander, we're detecting an anomaly in the enemy's attack pattern. There seems to be a significant gap in their eastern flank," Wells reported, her fingers flying over her console as she rerouted the data to the main display. "Could be a trap," Voss mused aloud, analyzing the potential for a tactical feint. "Or our best chance to outflank them," Wells countered. "We could reroute a battalion to exploit it." Voss considered for a moment, then gave the order, "Do it, and keep our comms open to the ground. I want real-time updates." Back on Gartheon, the ground forces received their new orders just as the enemy's fire intensified. Jackson grabbed her communicator. "Echo Team, you're with me. We're going to punch through their line and create an opening. Move out." Her team moved with precision, weaving through the chaotic battlefield towards the eastern flank. The ground beneath them was a tapestry of scorched earth and craters, testament to the ferocity of the conflict. As they reached the gap, Jackson and her team unleashed a flurry of fire, taking the enemy by surprise. Their bold maneuver paid off, and soon they were breaking through, disrupting the enemy's formations from within. Above them, Voss observed the progress with a steely gaze. "All units, press the advantage. This is our moment," he commanded, his voice resonant through the comms. The battle raged on, with human forces slowly turning the tide. Each soldier, driven by a mix of fear and determination, fought not just for victory, but for the very survival of their species in a war that spanned galaxies. As the sun began to set on Gartheon, casting long shadows over the battlefield, the humans held their ground, their spirits bolstered by the small victories that seemed to hint at the possibility of a larger triumph in this relentless war. The air crackled with electricity as the battle for Sector 9 reached a fever pitch. In orbit, the Herald of Dawn unleashed a barrage of orbital strikes, their precision guided by the data flowing incessantly from the ground. Commander Eli Voss watched the offensive unfold, his eyes narrowed, calculating the enemy's next move. On Gartheon's scarred surface, Sergeant Ava Jackson led her team deeper into the fray. Her armor was scorched and her energy reserves low, but her resolve never wavered. Around her, the battlefield was a chaotic symphony of light and noise, each burst from her rifle a note in the desperate anthem of war. "Keep pushing! Target their command units!" she yelled, directing her squad through the maelstrom. Her voice was hoarse, her throat raw from shouting commands and inhaling the acrid air. Lieutenant Kara Wells relayed real-time satellite imagery to Jackson's unit. "Ava, you've got a heavy unit moving your way, 6 o'clock. Looks like a command mech. Take it down, and we might just break their back." Jackson acknowledged with a terse nod, signaling her team to prepare for an ambush. They set up near a collapsed building, its skeletal remains providing the perfect cover. As the enemy mech lumbered into view, its armor gleaming menacingly in the fading light, Jackson and her team readied their anti-mech weapons. "Fire on my mark," she whispered, her finger poised over the trigger. The mech was nearly upon them when she gave the order. "Now!" The air erupted as rockets and energy pulses converged on the towering adversary. With a deafening roar, the mech staggered, its shielding failing under the onslaught. Above them, Voss watched the engagement with bated breath. "Support team, enhance their cover fire. Let's give them a fighting chance," he ordered, his voice a calm anchor in the storm of battle. The Herald responded with surgical strikes, targeting the enemy reinforcements trying to rally around the damaged mech. Explosions lit up the dusk, each one a hammer blow to the enemy's morale. On the ground, the tide turned palpably as the command mech crumpled, its structure compromised. Cheers rose from the human ranks, their spirits lifted by the sight of their formidable foe's downfall. "Push forward," Jackson commanded, leading her team through the debris. They moved quickly, exploiting the chaos they had created. Her squad's boots pounded the ground, their pace relentless. In the midst of the advance, a sudden surge of alien fighters burst through the smoke. The human line buckled under the unexpected assault. Jackson found herself face to face with an alien trooper, its features obscured by a battle mask. Reflexes honed by countless battles, she reacted instinctively, her combat training taking over as they clashed in brutal hand-to-hand combat. Back on the Herald, Wells monitored the engagement with growing anxiety. "Eli, Ava's team is surrounded. They're at risk of being overrun." Voss's response was immediate. "Deploy the shock troops. We're not losing Sector 9 today, not on my watch." As the elite shock troops descended from the skies in drop pods, their arrival turned the tide once again. The ground near Jackson erupted as the pods hit soil, and battle-hardened soldiers sprinted out to join the fray, reinforcing the beleaguered humans. With renewed vigor, the human forces pressed their advantage, pushing the enemy back step by step. The battle for Sector 9 was far from over, but under the relentless assault of human courage and determination, hope persisted, flickering in the heart of the storm. In the dwindling light of Garthion's twin suns setting behind the horizon, the battered regiments of humanity gathered their strength. The victory at Sector 9 had come at a high cost, but the crucial supply routes were now secure, and Commander Eli Voss allowed himself a moment to appreciate the resilience of his forces. The Herald of Dawn hovered like a vigilant guardian above, its hull scarred from the conflict, reflecting the brutal toll of the war. Voss reviewed the latest reports. The enemy's movements were erratic, their strategy unclear. It seemed the defeat had thrown them into disarray, but Voss knew better than to underestimate a cornered foe. Lieutenant Kara Wells approached with new data, her expression somber. "Sir, we've intercepted transmissions suggesting the enemy might be regrouping for a counterstrike deeper in the western sectors. It appears they're not as disorganized as we hoped." Voss nodded, his mind racing with the implications. "Prepare for a strategic redeployment. We can't let them regain momentum." Meanwhile, on the ground, Sergeant Ava Jackson and her squad utilized the brief lull to recuperate. Medics tended to the wounded, their grim faces illuminated by the soft light of medical scanners. Jackson checked on each of her team members, offering words of encouragement, her own fatigue masked by a firm resolve. Suddenly, the ground shook underfoot, a distant rumbling that grew steadily louder. Jackson's head snapped up, her senses alert. "Incoming! Defensive positions!" she shouted, just as the horizon lit up with the glow of approaching enemy craft. The battle resumed with terrifying intensity. Energy beams crisscrossed the battlefield, drawing bright lines of death in the twilight. Jackson's squad returned fire, their weapons a chorus of defiance against the encroaching darkness. Above them, the Herald of Dawn swung into action, launching a series of calculated strikes. Voss coordinated with ground forces, his voice a constant presence in the ears of his troops. "Focus your fire on the leading craft! Cut them off!" The enemy, desperate to reclaim their lost ground, pushed forward with reckless abandon. But the humans, seasoned by relentless combat, met them with a well-orchestrated defense. Jackson maneuvered her squad through the chaos, exploiting gaps in the enemy's assault, her every move driven by a blend of tactical acumen and raw survival instinct. Amidst the fray, a sudden breach in the human lines emerged as an enemy battalion broke through. The situation turned dire in moments. "We need support here!" Jackson's voice crackled over the comms, urgent and strained. Voss responded immediately, redirecting orbital support to the compromised area. High above, the Herald's cannons aligned, sending a devastating barrage that rocked the enemy, stalling their advance. The ground forces seized the opportunity, rallying to close the breach. Jackson led a countercharge, her figure silhouetted against the explosions that lit up the night sky. Her team, inspired by her fearless leadership, followed without hesitation, driving back the enemy with renewed vigor. As the battle wore on, the alien forces began to falter, their initial momentum lost under the relentless human counterattacks. The tide of battle turned slowly but unmistakably in favor of the humans. Each soldier's resolve hardened by the knowledge that their survival depended on not just holding the line, but pushing it forward. In the aftermath, as the enemy retreated into the darkness from which they had come, the human forces stood victorious yet again, their spirits bolstered by the knowledge that they had held firm against overwhelming odds. Voss watched from above, pride and sorrow mingling in his gaze. This war was far from over, but tonight humanity had endured. As the wreckage smoldered on the battlefield of Garthion, the war's tide seemed momentarily to ebb, allowing both sides a precarious pause. Commander Eli Voss used this lull to strategize the next phase of the conflict. The holographic map in the war room of the Herald of Dawn displayed various potential points of conflict, each pulsating like a heartbeat of war. Lieutenant Kara Wells reported the latest intelligence, her face illuminated by the soft blue light of the data streams. "Sir, surveillance has detected significant enemy activity in the Orthion sector. It looks like they're amassing a considerable force, possibly preparing for a large-scale offensive." Voss rubbed his chin thoughtfully. "Orthion sector, eh? That's deep in their territory. They could be planning to use it as a staging ground to launch attacks across multiple fronts." The possibility required a decisive response. "Assemble a covert strike team. We need to disrupt their preparations before they can initiate the offensive. And keep this quiet. We can't risk them catching wind of our plans." On the planet's surface, Sergeant Ava Jackson received her orders. Her squad had been chosen for the mission due to their proven effectiveness and stealth capabilities. As they geared up, Jackson briefed her team, her voice low and steady. "Our objective is to infiltrate the Orthion sector and gather intel on their operations. If possible, we're to sabotage their supply lines. Stay sharp, move quietly, and keep your comms open." The squad moved out under the cover of darkness, their movements a whisper against the rugged terrain. The landscape of Garthion was unforgiving, with jagged rocks and steep cliffs that cast long shadows under the twin moons. Meanwhile, aboard the Herald, Voss and Wells monitored the progress of Jackson's team. Each blip on the screen represented a heartbeat, a life at risk far below them. Voss felt the weight of each decision, knowing well that the outcome of this mission could significantly shift the war's momentum. As Jackson's team approached the Orthion sector, they encountered scattered patrols. With precision and coordination, they managed to neutralize the threats without raising an alarm, their actions barely a ripple in the quiet of the night. Deep within enemy lines now, Jackson located the central supply depot. Her eyes scanned the area, taking in the security measures and the routine of the patrolling guards. "Wells, we're in position. Initiating the sabotage operation now." Back on the Herald, Wells relayed the information to Voss, who nodded in approval. "Proceed with caution, Sergeant. We can't afford any mistakes." On the ground, Jackson and her team set charges at critical points, their movements synchronized and silent. As they retreated to a safe distance, Jackson gave the signal, and the night erupted in flames. The supply depot blazed, casting a fierce glow that reflected in her determined eyes. The explosion served a dual purpose, crippling the enemy's supply chain and serving as a stark reminder that humanity would not be subdued easily. As Jackson's team exfiltrated the area, dodging increased enemy activity stirred by the chaos, they maintained a low profile, disappearing into the night as stealthily as they had arrived. The success of the mission reverberated through the ranks of the human forces, a surge of morale boosting their spirits. Voss, watching the returns from the mission, allowed himself a rare smile. "Well done, Sergeant. Prepare for extraction." The Herald of Dawn stood ready, its engines a low hum in the cold vastness of space as it continued to watch over the planet below. The war was far from over, but tonight they had struck a significant blow against the enemy, a blow that would echo through the coming battles. As the light of dawn crept over the horizon of Garthion, illuminating the scarred and battered landscape, Commander Eli Voss stood at the viewport of the Herald of Dawn, contemplating the war's toll and the recent victory. The successful sabotage of the Orthion sector had dealt a significant blow to the enemy's resources, yet the war churned on, relentless and unforgiving. Lieutenant Kara Wells approached with a new set of data pads, her face etched with both fatigue and determination. "Sir, long-range sensors have picked up movement from the enemy's capital fleet. It seems they're mobilizing for what could be a final stand in this sector." Voss turned, his gaze sharp. "Have they now? It looks like this war might come to a head sooner than we expected. Plot their trajectory and prepare all hands for a possible engagement. We need to be ready for anything." The mood aboard the Herald shifted palpably as the crew steeled themselves for the confrontation that would likely decide the fate of Garthion and potentially the war itself. On the planet's surface, Sergeant Ava Jackson and her team were extracted just in time, the roar of the transport's engines drowning out the sounds of the enemy's confusion and chaos. Once aboard, Jackson immediately began preparations for the next, possibly final engagement. Her armor was patched and sealed, her weapons recharged, her resolve like tempered steel. In the war room, Voss and his command team analyzed every piece of intelligence. The enemy fleet's path suggested an all-out assault, a desperate attempt to reclaim what was lost. "We hold them at the Carrion Pass. It's the narrowest point in their trajectory and will limit their maneuverability," Voss planned, directing his fleet to position themselves advantageously. As the enemy fleet approached, the human forces were silent, a deadly calm before the storm. The Herald of Dawn and its sister ships formed a formidable line, their cannons primed and shields at full capacity. The first volleys of the battle were intense, lighting up the void of space with devastating energy. Voss commanded from the front, his voice a constant over the comm. "Hold lines, focus fire, and watch your flanks." Amid the chaos, Jackson fought on the ground, her team pivotal in thwarting enemy ground forces attempting to land and establish a forward base. Explosions tore through the sky as ships clashed above, the ground forces mirroring this celestial ballet of destruction. In the critical hours of battle, a daring maneuver by the human fleet broke through the enemy's center line. Wells monitored the breach, her voice excited yet steady. "Commander, we've broken through their defenses." Voss seized the moment. "All units, press the attack, drive them back." Humanity's forces surged, both in space and on the ground. The enemy, overwhelmed and unable to regroup, began to falter. The battle raged for hours, each second stretching into eternity under the relentless assault. As the last of the enemy ships either retreated or were destroyed, a profound silence fell over Garthion. The Herald of Dawn hovered in orbit, its battle scars evident but its presence unyielding. Voss stood over the command table, his crew around him, faces weary but eyes bright with the light of victory. "Set up patrols and begin damage assessment. Let's make sure they don't try this again." The war for Garthion was over, but the broader conflict still simmered across the galaxy. Yet for now, humanity had secured a crucial victory, their spirits buoyed by the knowledge that they had withstood the storm and emerged stronger. Sergeant Ava Jackson watched Garthion's sunrise from the deck of the transport, the light reflecting in her eyes. She knew the peace they had won was fragile, but for the moment, it was theirs to cherish. The war would wait for another day.